The shadows of the cave's wall are constantly changing, so there is no stability or consistency offered for those who bear witness to them, only a false reality. The argument I'll be making today is not an argument against the usage of all technology. The wheel is technology. When I refer to technology or tech in this paper, I'm speaking only of the entertaining, enchanting, perhaps addicting screens that constantly surround us. The way technology raises children is equivalent to the way the shadows of the cave's wall shapes the perception of the people inside. The difference between the allegory of the cave and the modern technological environment, however, is that those inside of the cave have no choice to be there. Yet unlike those in chains, we have the distinct opportunity to be the prisoner who escapes. Parents today are free to decide for themselves if they want their children to settle for the shadows of the cave or if they want them to experience the real things in the world. Technology is merely a shadow of what is really real, and only allowing children to see these shadows is not only injurious to them, but also to the parents and to the future of our country. When observing how the lives of children have been impacted by technology, it's important to see how the life of a child has changed over time. To illustrate this, imagine the following scenario. Two boys just turned 13 years old. You could say the children are quite similar by observation. However, there is one big difference between the two. One of them is growing up today in suburban Los Angeles, and the other resides in Athens, Greece around the year 300 BC. In Los Angeles, everything is digital. When the boy wakes up to his phone's alarm, he quickly scrolls through Instagram. Distracted by what his parents are trying to tell him, he runs out to the bus stop. On the bus, he finds a seat by himself and soon falls asleep since he stayed up the night before playing on his Xbox. At school, his computer teaches him. At home, his phone distracts him. His friendships are shallow. His parents, who should be his primary source of guidance, are his backups. Now in Athens, everything is experienced. The boy is awoken each morning by the rays of sun on his face. He walks down to the dining room where he enjoys a delicious breakfast with his family. Schooling engages the boy. He spends hours studying in great poetry and training in the classics with his tutor. He pursues his hobbies ardently, and his father guides him in the art of stonemasonry, which is the family trade. Family and friends are everything to the boy. The difference between these two stories is not the time period these children find themselves in. The difference is the environment the parents have chosen to cultivate for their child. According to Andy Crouch, author of The Tech-Wise Family, in collaboration with research done by the Barna Research Group, parental reliance on technology needs to decrease. Technology, says Crouch, is at best neutral in actually forming human beings who can create and cultivate as we are meant to. While the benefits of technology are undeniable, parents who use this fact as a crutch to support their effort in parenting are selling their children short of a proper childhood. Tech-reliant parenting has distorted traditional parental roles and has ushered in a new era of parenting which neglects and emotionally malnourishes children. The Center of the Developing Child at Harvard University has recently conducted a study that has shown that neglect is associated with a wider range of damage than active abuse while receiving less attention in policy and in practice. If neglect can harm a child more than abuse, why do we not shed any light on this issue? Well, what happens most of the time is a parent sees their child throwing a fit or having a hard time, but instead of trying to talk the issue through with their child, they hand their child some type of screen to distract them. This is not the main problem of the situation, though. The problem lies in the fact that afterward, the child is not instructed why he or she was handed the device. They do not know that what they're doing is wrong. Now they have a new reward-driven mindset. When I cry, I get the phone. In an interview with licensed professional counselor Keith McCurdy, he makes a comment on boredom, saying it is necessary for two things: decision-making and creativity. When we have boredom, we have to figure things out. When we remove all boredom, we hampered that developmental process. While tech-reliant parenting is different from neglect, neglect can easily be a byproduct of this parenting method. Conscious communication is vital. As a parent, it is crucial to act consciously and presently to provide for the emotional needs of a child. Technology, a sort of catalyst for the unconscious approach to parenting, inhibits the ability to act consciously, though. The Center for Parenting Education recently published an article titled "The Dual Role of Parents, Providing Nurture and Structure." In this article, the author describes the difference between nurture and structure roles, saying, in the nurture role, parents provide for the child's basic needs, such as food, clothing, shelter, etc., as well as give love, understanding, support, guidance, and acceptance. In the structure role, parents impose rules, set limits, use discipline, establish and follow through with consequences, and hold their children accountable for their actions. It's important to understand the difference between these two because it is so crucial to see why a balance of the two is necessary for the desired outcome, an emotionally healthy child. Although a perfect equilibrium between nurture and structure is not possible, it can easily be concluded that technology contributes to neither. You cannot provide emotionally for a child when you take a backseat to parenting, allowing iPhones and iPads to act as the primary care providers. If the life of a child is dominated by technology, not only will they suffer emotionally, but they will also suffer physical or social disadvantages. The Mayo Clinic has ensured that too much screen time or regular exposure to poor quality programming has been linked to obesity, inadequate sleep schedule, behavior problems, delays in language and social skills development, and attention problems. In another study by the CDC, it's been proven that the average screen time for children aged 8 to 18 is a whopping 8 hours per day. Taking these things into consideration, parents must be careful before they're tempted to hand their child some type of screen to make their own life easier. In my interview with Keith McCurdy, he restated an article done by the Pew Research Center, saying, in 2012, 8.4% of teenagers had clinically significant levels of anxiety and depression. In 2022, that number was 29.8%. If you ask yourself, what major event happened in this 10-year window which caused such a dramatic spike in these numbers, we can find nothing. There were no major wars, no major traumas, healthcare was much better, there were more services available for their age, but what we do see is that in 2012, we start crossing the threshold of over 50% of teenagers being on social media. Now that number is close to 97%. A tech-ruled lifestyle may end in the same cause and effect that comes from miseducation that smoking cigarettes has shown. Let me explain that. In the early 1900s, when there was no way to observe the negative long-term effects of smoking cigarettes, many participated in this practice. Most considered smoking to even be a medical or healthy habit. Alcohol, tobacco, and gambling all have minimum age requirements because they're considered to be dangerous for children to participate in, which is true. An interesting observation Keith McCurdy makes, though, is that the majority of people suffering or dying from these practices begin participating in them prior to the minimum age requirement. A study by the Sapien Labs has shown that the neurological stimulation a person receives from social media is greater than that of all three of those mentioned addictions. In the foreseeable future, we will likely be just as apologetic about tech overuse as we are now to those who are ignorant of the negative and long-term effects from smoking cigarettes. Andy Crouch puts it like this: when previous generations were confronted with the perplexing challenges of parenting, they had the wisdom of generations to fall back on. But this rate of technological change has surpassed anyone's ability to develop enough wisdom to handle it. Parents must learn from humanity's mistakes, look forward, and decide that technology is something which should be greatly limited in the household. One often unnoticed factor of this argument is the effect that it will conversely have on the parent. Parents most of the time do not hand their child a screen to make their children's lives easier, but rather to make their own life easier. It becomes difficult for children to begin relying on their parents when they're used to relying on technology, in the same way that it is difficult for a child when they are old enough to begin walking when they are used to riding around in a stroller. The issue with this is that being pushed around all the time does not build any type of mental or physical strength. The easiest way is almost never the right way. Parents must walk with their children through the issues, difficulties, and hardships, and they, as well as their children, will begin to develop a stronger character. A study done by Barna Research Group has shown that the reason parents today think parenting is harder now than ever is because of technology and its negative aspects, some of which include a struggle finding a balance between online and physical activity, inappropriate or pornographic content, and online bullying, just to name a few. If you can visualize these negative aspects of technology, you can also see how they might conversely affect the parent. Like the parent of the child in the Los Angeles narrative I presented earlier, it becomes difficult to connect to your child when they would prefer to connect to their iPhone or Xbox instead. This further supports my claim that parents should attempt to control the overuse and abuse of technology's so-called benefits at any cost. After all, if the drawbacks of something outweigh the benefits, should we even try to harness the benefits to begin with? Instead, parents play with a deadly fire which will eventually burn the household to the ground. It is no secret that technology drives much of our habitual decision-making. Proponents of tech-reliant parenting would argue that technology is necessary for appropriate and relevant child development. They would argue that the technology they provide their children with is educational and sets their children up for success in the modern world. However, they lack a full understanding of the negative effects that technology has on children and parents alike. Let's say the child I mentioned in the previous narrative of Los Angeles has just picked up a new hobby. Let's say he's become passionate about playing an instrument. So he goes to his parents and asks them to teach him how to play it. With no knowledge of how music works, they reply that they cannot help him. So he utilizes various online training programs as well as YouTube and other video sharing platforms, to develop a skill quickly. It's easy to see that technology has trained young people especially to problem solve in ways which have never been possible before. There's a solution to millions of problems at the click of a button or tap of a screen. However, we must ask ourselves, is this new way of problem solving beneficial to the parents and children who have become so reliant on it? I would reply no. Yes, this method is easy. Yes, this method seems more efficient, but the problem is you never have to think. Technology inhibits creativity and decision making in children, so parents should be careful how they allow their children to find solutions to problems. It can be said that parents who allow their children such access to technology are doing their children a favor. After all, it's a tech-oriented world, so is allowing children access to technology not just allowing them to communicate with the world in its modern state? One who supports this claim might ask, how can you expect my child to be digitally literate when you're limiting the amount of time they can use technology? A study done by VTech has proven that the amount of time it takes for a child to learn technology is surprisingly quick. Since the time it takes for someone to pick up and master technology is proven to be so short, children should not be required to learn using technology from such an early age. Why though should we just consider those who are fully capable of learning and growing the way an average child does? A special needs center tech company called Brainwave describes the benefits for assistive technology for children with disabilities, the three main ones being social inclusion and independence, enhanced learning opportunities, and increased emotional well-being. If that statement, which countless of studies have proven, is true, then how can I still argue against technology? While it is true that technology has opened a new door for children with disabilities, when tech usage for anyone becomes unrestricted or unjustified, it becomes an issue. This can also be described the way author Andy Crouch describes it, as being outside of its proper place. So my answer to that original question is another question. Is not the proper place for technology different from child to child? The Institute of Educational Sciences have released that over half of schools utilize the benefits or utilize educational technology in some form, while only a fraction of those schools are confident in its benefits. These schools dive into technology ignorant of the negative effects it generates, using tech for tech's sake. If schools continue to purchase and employ technology at this rate, it will not be long before we drift further away from the education system we're all familiar with and further towards the shadows of the wall of the cave. The main group of parents who have yet to be addressed are those who believe technology has little or nothing to do with the way their child is raised. These parents may attribute the different behaviors of the children I mentioned in the previous narrative to genetic traits or natural tendencies. After all, they're different children, so shouldn't they be expected to act differently? While it is true that nature does play a huge role in the way a child turns out, this does never warrant the neglect of nurture, which is primarily required in the lives of children. When I was younger, my parents were overseas in the process of adopting my little brother. My older brothers and I would Skype them every day. It is true that technology can connect people from anywhere in the world, but this does never truly replicate the authenticity of being there with that person. According to Science Direct journals, compared to technology-mediated interactions such as social media, in-person interactions are characterized by higher satisfaction of belongingness need and greater bonding experience. We once again find ourselves returning to the allegory of the cave and the realization that all technology can ever be is a substitution or shadow of what is real. Knowing the disadvantages that occur from parents' over-reliance on technology, I urge you to consider the need for technology to be given its proper place in the home, a place where it does not interrupt the vital connection between parent and child. Technology has torn down the walls which have previously held the family together, ushering in a new era of parenting that is dangerous to the children who are being raised by it. If we continue to allow technology to overtake more spheres of our lives, it will not be long before technology becomes the primary or even sole influence in the lives of children. I urge you parents in the room, and even children, to see this issue which has gone under the radar for far too long. The problem is only getting worse. In order to fix the technology problem by which we have all been absorbed, we have to actually desire the change. God knows our situation. He will not judge us as if we have no issues to overcome. What matters, though, is the perseverance and sincerity of our will to overcome them. Before we can be cured, we must want to be cured. God intends for our families to be tight-knit and characterized by love. So if we intend to follow God's design for a family, He is eager to be by our side to help us through the struggle. I would like to push each of you to action today to help rebuild the house that has been torn down by technology and its dangerous effects. I desire that each person in here will begin to take steps to limit tech usage and rely on strength from God to overcome the hardship that will come with it. Remaining in the sphere of tech's influence is selfish and destructive, and continuing to use technology anywhere outside of its proper place will continue to fan the forest fire that is technology's increasing use. So let us be the first to see the issue presented today and do our part in eliminating the modern-day third parent, technology. Thank you. I would now like to open the floor for questions.
Thank you, Seth. So having young kids at home, this topic is always on my mind. I've come across some podcasts and movements which really apply this to the parent as well, advocating like for pretty extreme stances on the parent's use of technology. You've talked and built a really compelling case about the use of technology in children and extreme restraints there. How much of that do you think applies to adults, even adults who aren't parents? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I I definitely agree. It plays a huge role in parents, and I think one of the most important things to understand about this argument is that a lot about the way a child turns out is dependent on how the parent acts, and children aren't going to do something that they don't see their parent do to begin with. So when a child is constantly surrounded by a parent who won't get off their phone, what does that really tell the child? Because I believe it tells the child that that's okay, and that's something which they should learn to do. In the same way that many children of abusive families turn out to be abusive themselves, if a child is constantly surrounded by overusage of technology and clear use of technology outside of its proper place, that really tells the child that that's something that's okay and permissible.
I appreciate that. One more thing, in maybe 30 seconds or less, could you give the most compelling reason for everyone in the room to read Andy Crouch's book?
I'd say if you're not a parent, then read it for yourself, because there's a lot of things you can apply that I've applied to my own life in terms of limiting technology and social media and all that kind of stuff. For parents, I would say that's probably a must read, because there's so many just great things in there about rules to have in your household about the proper place. And it's a really cool concept, having a proper place, because it's true in the household. There is a place for technology, especially in this world. Technology is everywhere. So there has to be some role of technology. And he clearly defines a great, proper place for it in the home. Miss Janie? Thank you.
I always enjoy a good beat down that can be what I'm doing. But could you share with us things that you came up with in your research that would be alternatives for giving a kid screen time? What are some things that you found that would be a good replacement for that?
So for that, I actually have a story, because me and Mr. Patton were talking the other day, and he was telling a really compelling anecdote about this in his life. So his son, Will Patton, had cancer when he was a kid. And so he was at the hospital undergoing chemotherapy treatment for a good bit of his time as a child. And in the words of Mr. Patton, he let him get addicted to Mario. And so, he would sit at the hospital for hours on end having nothing to do. So what did he do? He just played on his DS, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so he got, like I said in Mr. Patton's word, he got addicted to Mario. And there's nothing wrong with that there, because, like I said, it has a proper place for each child. But the issue was, when he got home, he was still addicted to the same Mario he was when he was undergoing chemotherapy. And one thing Mr. Patton said was that he introduced him to guitar, and all that creative energy that he was using to play on his Nintendo, he was starting to use to play guitar. And then over time, he began developing a skill, and he is a great guitar player. And I just think, like, imagine if he had never introduced him to a hobby like that. Like, he wouldn't have a whole lot to show for all that time he spent and all that energy he spent. But now I think a hobby is a great thing, because you can look back and see you actually did something and not just scrolled for hours or played on your video games for hours. I think a hobby is probably the best thing, or just, it doesn't have to be necessarily one hobby, but like parents playing with their child is super important. And that also goes along with it. They just have to have some creative outlet that's not just sucking all the energy out of them like that. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
So you said you eliminated social media. So what motivated you to eliminate it, and how has it
Yeah, that's a really good question. Last year, I know a story about that. Last year, around the time of Lent, I was looking to give something up, and me and Alexa decided that we were going to give up Instagram. And I didn't really think much of it. I just knew, according to my screen time notifications I got on Sunday, that I spend a lot of time on Instagram. So we decided to delete it. And then I noticed something really interesting because the next day in the morning, I pulled out my phone. I went to swipe to where I knew Instagram was on my phone, but it wasn't there. And I was like, yeah, that might be a problem. So I started just thinking more about how much it played into my own life, and I started noticing the effects of it. And the more I started taking away those things in my life, I started noticing like I could be a lot more productive. I had time to read my Bible all of a sudden. And so I think social media plays a lot bigger of an impact than kids realize, especially. And we're almost blinded by it in a sense. And it takes that one step of faith to start to realize and make change with that. Sir Davis?
Great job. I really appreciate your use of Plato and the shadows and it's incredibly insightful. So there's a recent book by a guy named Jonathan Haidt called Ancient Generation. He talks about this in an even more detrimental way than Andy Crouch. And he says, you know, if you give your kids an iPhone, you're basically putting them in danger of depression, suicide because of the effects of social media, especially. And when I'm listening to these things, reading these things, I'm like, I had no idea that giving my kid a phone was so detrimental, but they both have them, both the younger ones. And so I'm curious what you would say to someone like me who's already handed a death wish to their kid.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that pertains to most parents because I would say most parents have done that. And like I said, there's really nothing wrong with them having a phone, especially when they're aged that they're going places without you and it's not at school. They need to be able to communicate with you. There's a lot of resources online, like apps you can use to help limit the screen time. I do think it's important, though, that you have things like tech-free zones in your household, like the dinner table or the living room. It's important you have places like that they know like that's not okay to use technology. And then I would also say it's important that there's a conversation there with the child because I talked about the child that was throwing a fit that the parent handed a screen and they didn't know why they were. And so that now they're like, okay, so this is a good thing that I cry and because I get something I like. It's important that you have the conversation with them that, you know, technology is a tool and it shouldn't be the primary source of like adoration and idolization for you. And just have those conversations, like I said, to begin to allow them to understand the proper place of technology. And ultimately, like right away, they might not understand that, but I think provided outlets and other things like that, it's a growing process in the same way that like pretty much any hard decision is. Like it's going to take time, but kind of have to wean them off of technology in a lot of ways.
One of the things in that book, he says they polled middle school students and they said, hey, if you could live your life without the stress and pressure that comes as a result of being on social media, would you want that? And the question back from the students was, would that just be for me or would it be for my whole school? And if the surveyor said it would be, if it was for your whole school, would you want it? More than half the middle schoolers said if it was done away for everybody, I actually would want it. But if it was just me, I wouldn't because then I would be the outsider. So then they're kind of in that catch-22. Like, what's your response to that?
I mean, it's clear that a lot of stuff on social media and technology is a product of peer pressure. And that's one of the main reasons I got Instagram in the first place is because I just knew my friends had it and I wanted to have it. And I didn't really know why. I didn't even know what the app looked like really. But I knew I wanted it. And so I think it's in a lot of ways, it is the product of peer pressure. And my response to that would be, it takes a movement. And I think if people are aware of it, like it could get the ball rolling. I think especially at a place like PCA, that'd be something that would be attainable is having like kids who just see what the problem is there and start to decide for themselves that that's something they should be limited. Because at that point, it really is up to the kid when they're teenagers. My paper is mainly about younger children who are still developing, really, but teenagers, it's really up to them to decide that. That's all.
Said that with limiting technology hardship,
Mhm.
if you have a parent who is trying to limit technology, what advice would you give to your friends or fellow students in working through that with their parents?
So what would I say to kids whose parents were trying to?
If there's hardship there, there's frustration.
Mhm.
Life's not fair. What would you say?
So if I had friends that their parents were trying to limit, okay, just make sure I understood you. Let me think about that for a second.
I guess what advice would you give them in honoring them?
Oh yeah, well yeah, I was gonna get at the fact that mother knows best, or I think in a lot of ways it's easy to like look at what your parents say and kind of just push it off because they're just old people talking to you, but it's super important that you listen to your parents. And the more I grow up, the more I realize like my parents were kind of right about some stuff. And I think it might hold some more weight coming from me to a younger kid because they can see like I've had to grow through that. But like I said, it's super easy to see or like think about what your parents are doing and be like, oh, they don't care about me, they're just doing this. But your parents are doing it because they care about you, especially if they're taking like such a faithful step like that, like limiting technology. Like they're doing it in best interest of you, and you just have to trust it, and see it through the process because it's not an easy process. But I can guarantee with 100% certainty, if you listen to your parents and go through with that with them, you're going to end up a happier and more productive person at the end of it.
I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you can take the.
Okay, Mr. Kevin.
Really good job.
Thank you.
Are there any scriptures or biblical principles that you found in your research? Obviously, smartphones wasn't even conceived 2,000 plus years ago when these were written, but are there any things you found connections that were meaningful to you? Scriptures, biblical principles, and this idea.
There actually was. I left the paragraph out because I didn't think it was super strong, but I'll share it with you now. It's pretty much the story of Peter denying Jesus 3 times, and after his death and resurrection, he goes to Peter and forgives him 3 times. And I think it's so cool how for each one of Peter's mistakes, Jesus, he could have just said, I forgive you for all 3 of those, but instead he goes through each of those individually and forgives each of those. And I think that's not necessarily a technology thing, but I think it's important that parents are just very clear on their communication, and that kind of applies to technology, kind of like the story I talked about of the parent or the child throwing a fit. If the parent doesn't like have clear-cut communication why they're giving their children technology or doing these kinds of things, it can create all types of like bad perceptions of the role of technology in the child. So it's important that parents, like Jesus in that story, fully flesh out each individual facet of their what they're trying to do in parenting, because it's important that kids know that kind of stuff.
Okay, I'll go ahead and ask you. So, off of Ms. Hollis's question, and like what we've talked about in class, it is an idol. Our social media, our phones, they are idols in our lives. So we have these idols. We need to remove the idols. We're going to remove social media. We're going to limit our screen time. If you did have a friend or somebody in the room who says, okay, I need to get off my phone so much. I don't need to be spending a whopping 8 hours on a screen. How long did it take you to break the habit? You did what your thesis is about. What would you say to encourage them? Well, after, how much time did it become easier and you realized, wow, this has made my life better?
Yeah. So to that, I would say I make a point in my paper about technology having greater stimulation than like a lot of drugs or different types of addictions. And so it really is like getting off a drug in a lot of ways. I wouldn't say I was like so into it that I couldn't like function without it, but I definitely was connected to it in an unhealthy way. And so there's going to be a period, just like someone going through rehab after drugs, there's going to be a period where all you want to do is go back to it. But if you allow yourself to struggle through that, and I think the most important thing for us in this room is that, you have to rely on strength from God, and your worship needs to be directed to God, because when you're worshiping your phone or Instagram or whatever it is, the only thing you can make stop that is if you redirect your worship. And so worshiping God instead of your phones and everything is crucial to that process. And like I said to Ms. Hollis, it's going to be a hard time, and there's going to be a lot of struggle. But after you get over that period of where it's just super difficult to go without it, you're going to find yourself in a time where you can even like have social media again, and you don't feel like such a connection to it where you like aren't okay with deleting it again, but you're going to find yourself disconnected from it in an extremely healthy way. Sir David?
So I'm curious, a year out, what do you feel like you're missing out on Instagram, or what do you feel like you benefited by not?
I definitely miss out on a lot of jokes. Sometimes my friends talk about stuff I don't know. Or yeah, I feel like I just missed out on some jokes. Definitely a lot of sports stuff, because Abram always tell me like the soccer scores or the basketball scores, and I'm like, I haven't watched a single game all year. That's normally where I get all my sports stuff from. Besides that, I don't really think a whole lot socially. I've actually felt more connected to the people around me, because I don't have to rely on like time outside of school to connect to my school friends. I'm like, I can just talk to them at school. And so this year I've got really close to a lot of my friends at school. It could just be because I'm a senior, but I really do think it's because I'm prioritizing and having intentionality with the time at school.
And so if you are a father one day, how old will your kids be when they get a phone?
I would say, kind of like I was telling Mr. Davis earlier, they don't really need a phone until they're somewhere without you that's not school. And so when they start, like I would say, are probably around high school, 14 or 15, when they're starting to learn how to drive and their friends are taking them places, and there's somewhere where they can't go to the school phone to get you, and they don't have a phone, like that's when they would need the communication from that. That's when I would give them like a phone, but I wouldn't give them social media so at least they're able to drive. Yeah, that's what I believe personally. We're good?
Yep.
All right, thank you guys for your time.